That moment when you look over and you realize you weren't even recording, so you have to do the entire video all over again. What's going on, you guys? It's your Huggable Hipster here, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be diving into the topic of difficult games. Why? What are they? Huh? What is that creature over there staring at me? A lot of people would consider Dark Souls a difficult game. A lot of people would consider Returnal a difficult game. Returnal is just annoying at times more than anything. If you know what you're doing and you prepare correctly, you can get through the game and it won't be as difficult as need be, but I digress. So I thought that this discussion would be so prevalent to have, especially with a lot of the discussions that I'm seeing around Twitter and around Reddit and a whole host of places, if you will, even in the comment section of certain YouTube videos of where people are saying that the games, the Souls games, Souls-like games, even roguelike games don't have to be as difficult as they are. Difficult games are brought up in conversation. People automatically go to, oh my God, Dark Souls, Dark Souls. Why? Because we saw from the birth of Dark Souls, which was Demon Souls, we saw that game take over a population, a demographic, an entire age group, if you will, of players who became known as the, I'm going to say this, and this is probably not an accurate term, but the get good crowd. That's where the term get good came from, were Dark Souls players. And the thing is that when I see a lot of players today who utilize the term, it's not utilized as something where it's supposed to be, and I've talked about this in other videos that I've done, of where get good isn't supposed to be something demeaning or something mean, even though people can use it that way. Unfortunately, people use it like as a big brother, big sister type thing of where, oh, get good, practice, you'll get better when you practice type thing. But unfortunately, bad eggs in the group turned it into something rather nasty. So when I look at difficult games, there's a mentality that you have to practice in order to get good. You have to practice the craft in order to become good at it. It's just common knowledge. And I see this argument that difficult games aren't fun because they're difficult, or difficult games are like Dark Souls. I mean, I don't know what the issue is with Dark Souls, why people don't like it so much. Is it because of the difficulty, or is it because people don't want to put the time into it so they get the best results? A genuine question here. When we look at difficult games, we have to be able to break it apart from Dark Souls. We have to be able to break it apart and say, again, just because it is difficult does not mean it is like Dark Souls. Perfect example is Ender Lily. Ender Lily is a Metroidvania style game. It is one of the most beautiful, haunting games I have ever played. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's a difficult game though. The bosses are actually challenging, and they have a right to be so, because within the world and within the Metroidvania style that it is, you have the balance between difficult and fair, beauty, aesthetic, all that kind of stuff. So when we see a game that's balanced, but that's also difficult, and it incorporates so many different parts and pieces to the, never-ending puzzle that is these types of games, that's just what they are. It doesn't mean that it's Dark Souls. It doesn't mean that it's Souls-like or any of anything of that nature, because what people try to do sometimes is they try to put it into a box. That way their brain can tangibly understand what's going on for something that they don't understand or they don't want to be bothered. We also have to look at the fact that difficulty is completely subjective. Completely subjective. If you tell someone else, I don't know, Resident Evil 2 is one of the most difficult games that they ever played, and a person like me is like, it's one of the easiest games I've ever played. It's mostly story. Another person might think that Blood Rain is one of the most difficult games that they ever played. So difficulty is based on subjectiveness, what the player's experience is and what kind of games they've played in their past. For me, I never played a game like Dark Souls before, so that's why for me at the time, keep in mind, at the time, was incredibly difficult for me because I never played anything like that. I never had to kind of bend to the will of a game where it's like, okay, game, you want what you want from me, that's it, fine, you can have me, it's good. Just recently, like I've said before on my Twitter and in yesterday's video, I believe, I finished Returnal, and to date, it is one of the trickier games I've ever played. Sekiro still holds the title for most difficult game I've ever played, and I wouldn't necessarily call Returnal difficult. It was like a puzzle that you had to figure out, which it's kind of funny because it's like Hades was the first roguelike game I ever played, and even that game was more strict than how Returnal is approached. 3 different times and got separate parts of the story. It's fascinating. It's an incredible experience. I think my fastest time with Hades was a little over 30 minutes. Once you get the hang of these types of roguelike games, they are so easy to just breeze through. And it's the same with Returnal. You know, once you get the hang of anything, for that matter, it's going to be easier for you because you understand it, and then it doesn't become difficult anymore. So difficulty is subjective. It is something of where you say one thing to one person, they're going to have a completely different opinion, just like everything in the gaming industry. Just like everything in the community, you're going to have different opinions and different outlooks on absolutely everything. There are also other things that can make a difficult game difficult, like bugs. If you encounter so many bugs within a certain period of time, it's going to make a game difficult to go through. You know, the different features in a game, I don't know, you can call a game difficult for whatever reason you can cook up. But when it comes down to it, there's no objectiveness. What? At the end of it all, there's no objective way to say that a game is difficult where people will unanimously agree with you. The only circumstance that I've seen people actually agreed that, oh yeah, no, this game is difficult across the board is with Sekiro. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, unanimously with everyone that I've seen in the gaming community has said that that game is difficult. The only way that I can see that game being easy for everyone is if there was an option to be able to choose. And we all know that From Software does not like to put options of ease for people in their games. You know, you can't choose easy, normal, hard, nightmare. We don't have those options with From Software. Okay, it is uncharted territory. It's the Wild West when it comes to those games. When we look at a game and we look at something objectively, our mind has to cling on to a fact, or it has to cling on to something to associate it with. It can't just be an open-ended. Our minds really don't like open-ended things. Like I've said before, difficulty in a game is completely subjective. A game that you might find difficult, someone else might find incredibly easy, and so on. Dark Souls 3 was one of the easiest Souls games I've ever played besides Demon Souls. Those two, hands down, easiest Souls games I've ever played. Why is that? Because I beat Ishin Sword Saint and I was able to beat all of the other Souls games, and I had practice with that franchise more times than I can count. Having experience with one thing in the same genre you will do so much better with other games in that genre because it's similar. It's a familiarity. It's like a home. Playing through some of the Demon Souls bosses, I was like, the areas are more tough than what the actual bosses are. And then you can bring into the argument, well, are the bosses not difficult because you had practice with games like this before, or are they not difficult because they're just not difficult bosses? So there are many different arguments that you can make. I feel like there's also this battle within the game community of where this battle of butting heads is the biggest reason why there are different strokes for different folks. There are different games for different types of people. If you're someone who only loves difficult games, great. If you're someone who only loves playing cozy games, great. That's why we have different genres, if you will. We have different types of games for everyone. And that's the beauty of gaming. There's so many different things for so many different types of people. Now, difficulties aren't a straightforward concept either. You guys gotta understand of where I said before that difficulty is completely subjective. There are different types of internal difficulties as well that you might have with the game, whether it be an emotional difficulty or, you know, something where it's a psychological one of where, okay, I need to understand where the character is going with this so I can proceed to the next checkpoint or the next boss or whatever it is, because with the story there comes a certain barrier that you have to get through in order to go to the next part and the next part and the next part. And as players, we are retaining massive amounts of information every single day when we are playing different games, not only having to understand the controls but having to understand the story, retain it, and save it in a box for later so we can go back to it when the end of the game comes and we have to put all the pieces together. That in itself, that's another level of difficulty as well. games are multifaceted, they are incredibly unique, and they are something in our culture where we can find ourselves mentally and emotionally through them, and spiritually as well, because there are certain, keep in mind, like, these games are birthed from ideas of individuals. So those ideas can have impacts on different people. They can have impacts in the way that we govern and live our lives. It can have impacts on the way that we are strategic about how we go about our lives. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts and what you guys think of the constant conversation around this topic of difficult games. But you guys, that's it for me. If you all like my face and what I do, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell down below. I make videos every day here on YouTube. May you find your worth in the waking world, your hunter. Stay casually nerdy, and I will see you all in the next video. Umbasa.